You know that feeling, right? That specific, golden hour glow of a Sunday evening? The weekend is over, but you're returning home feeling refreshed, a little tired in a good way, wrapped in the comfortable silence of a trip well spent. That was us. That was the precise moment, frozen in time like a perfect photograph. The station was a cathedral of mundane journeys. The air was thick with the scent of diesel fumes from the idling trains, mixed with the sweet, buttery aroma of popcorn from a vendor's cart and the rich, earthy smell of rain on old stone. It wasn't quiet, but the noise was a comfortable, predictable symphony of human transit. The distant, robotic voice of the announcer echoing under the vast, arched ceiling, the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of suitcase wheels on worn tiles, the muffled laughter of a group of students, and the gentle hum of anticipation for departures and arrivals. We were standing on Platform 7, an island of calm in the gentle river of people. Our weekend in the mountains felt like a dream already fading, a cherished secret we shared. The crisp, pine-scented air had been replaced by the station's warmth, but we still carried it with us, I think. In our relaxed posture, in the quiet smiles we exchanged. Thomas, my husband of 15 years, was leaning against a pillar, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he scrolled through his phone, a faint, absent-minded smile playing on his lips. He was probably looking at the pictures we'd taken. A silly selfie at the summit, our faces wind-whipped and happy, a photo of a curious deer that had wandered near our cabin, a shot of the two of us by the fireplace, glasses of red wine in hand. I watched him for a moment, this man I knew so well. The way his brow would furrow just slightly when he was concentrating, the way he'd push his glasses up with his knuckle. I knew the weight of his hand in mine, the sound of his sigh when he finally relaxed, the specific shade of gray starting to thread through his dark hair at the temples. This was my universe. This man, this moment. Our two small suitcases stood obediently between us, tags from the little mountain town's lodge still fluttering from the handles. My own heart was slow, content. I was already mentally transitioning back to reality, thinking about the unpacking, the emails waiting for me, the lunch I'd need to make for our son, Liam, tomorrow. They were not stressful thoughts, but the familiar, comforting rhythms of a life we had built together. I nudged his foot with mine. The 6:15 to Cedar Grove is now arriving on Platform 4. The announcer called, and I nodded towards the giant timetable board. Almost our turn. 15 minutes. I call the window seat. He looked up from his phone, his smile widening into a proper one, the one that crinkled the corners of his eyes. You always call the window seat, and you always fall asleep before we even leave the city limits. That's the best part, I protested, laughing softly. Waking up and already being halfway home. The light streaming through the massive glass windows of the station was long and low, casting everything in a warm, honeyed amber. I caught the dust motes dancing in the air, making them look like flecks of gold. It illuminated the face of a young woman nervously checking her watch, the tired but happy slouch of a father carrying a sleeping child on his shoulders, the patient stance of a conductor checking his clipboard. Everything felt bathed in a sense of rightness, of order. This was the rhythm of life. You go away, you come back. Trains arrive, trains depart. The world turns on a schedule you can set your watch by. I remember feeling a profound sense of gratitude. It was one of those simple, piercing moments of clarity where you look at your life and think, yes, this is good. This is enough. The mild ache in my legs from our long hike felt like a trophy. The warmth of Thomas's presence beside me was my anchor. The gentle chaos of the station was the backdrop to our small, perfect bubble of contentment. We were just two more faces in the crowd, anonymous and safe, waiting for our train to take us home, utterly unaware that the universe was about to violently recalibrate. This was the deep, steady breath before the plunge. The perfect, heartbreaking calm before the storm.
That profound peace, that golden hour contentment, it's shattered. It didn't crack or fade. It was obliterated in the span of a single heartbeat. One moment, I was watching the dust dance in the sunbeams, feeling the pleasant tiredness in my bones. The next, the world tilted on its axis. It started with his hands. Thomas had been holding his phone loosely, his thumb idly scrolling. I saw his grip tighten. His knuckles bleaching white so suddenly it was as if either received an electric shock. The phone, a moment ago a portal to our happy memories, was now forgotten, its screen winking out as his hand dropped to his side. My gaze traveled from his hand to his face, and the breath caught in my throat. The man I knew was gone. The gentle, crinkled-eyed smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of terrifying intensity. All the softness, all the relaxation of the last 48 hours, was scraped away, leaving behind something raw, primal, and hyper alert. His eyes, usually so warm and thoughtful, were no longer seeing the pleasant sphere around us. They were scanning, calculating, flicking with a rapid, terrifying precision over the crowd behind me. They weren't just looking. They were assessing, measuring, categorizing. It was the gaze of a predator, or of prey that knows a predator is near. It was a look he had never seen on his face before, a look that didn't belong in this safe, mundane world of platform announcements and popcorn smells. The ambient noise of the station, the laughter, the rolling suitcases, the distant hum of conversation, seemed to dial down, as if someone had turned a volume knob on the world. All I could hear was the sudden, harsh rhythm of my own heart thudding in my ears. The golden light now felt oppressive, highlighting the stark, pale tension in his face. Thomas. My voice came out as a whisper, thin and reedy, barely audible even to me. What is it? What's wrong? He didn't look at me. His focus was absolute, locked onto something, or someone, in the middle distance. His head was tilted just slightly, as if he were listening to a frequency far beneath the station's hum, a sound only he could perceive. His jaw was clenched so tight he could see the muscle twitching beneath his skin. This wasn't confusion or mild concern. This was a deep, visceral knowing. It was in the set of his shoulders, pulled back and down, bracing. It was in the slight crouch of his posture, a coiling of springs, ready to unload. He was no longer my husband, the accountant who worried about mortgage rates and laughed at bad pants. In the space of 3 seconds, he had been replaced by a stranger, a soldier, a man who had seen the dark underbelly of the world and recognized its scent on the breeze. The comfortable warmth of the station evaporated, replaced by a sudden, inexplicable chill that crawled up my spine. The perfect photograph of our life was ripped down, and in its place was a stark, terrifying blank canvas. And I was the only one who could see what was about to be painted on it. The calm was not just over. It felt like it had never existed at all.
The silence between us was no longer comfortable. It was a high-pitched void, screaming with unspoken terror. I was frozen, my mind scrambling to process the alien creature my husband had become. My brain offered up a dozen logical, mundane explanations. Maybe he saw a pickpocket, perhaps he'd forgotten his wallet on the train, maybe he was having some kind of sudden, silent medical episode. But my gut, my primal instinct, knew better. It knew the language his body was speaking was one of pure survival. His eyes finally snapped to mine, and the intensity in them was like a physical blow. There was no warmth there, no reassurance. Only a terrifying, laser-focused urgency that stripped away any protest I might have had. He didn't look like a man who was worried. He looked like a man who was certain. His voice, when it came, was the most frightening part. It wasn't a yell. It wasn't panicked. It was low, guttural, and utterly devoid of the familiar cadence I'd loved for 15 years. It was a voice stripped bare of all emotion except one, imperative necessity. It was a voice that brooked no argument, accepted no hesitation. It was a command drilled into him by experiences he'd always kept locked away from me. Sarah, just my name, but it was spoken like a key turning in a lock. My blood ran cold. We need to leave now. The words weren't loud, but they cut through the ambient noise of the station with the force of a thunderclap. They weren't a suggestion. They weren't a question. They were a statement of absolute, non-negotiable fact. We need to leave now. My lips parted. The questions, the logical protests, they formed a tangled knot in my throat. But Our train, our bags, our weekend. It's right there. The words wouldn't come. I just stared at him, my eyes wide, my own body beginning to tremble in response to the adrenaline I could see coursing through him. I saw his gaze flicker over my shoulder again for a nanosecond, and his hand shot out, not to grab me, but to firmly grasp my upper arm. The touch wasn't painful, but it was iron-strong. It was a guide. It was an anchor. It was the physical manifestation of his command. The world around us continued its ignorant dance. A child squealed with laughter near the popcorn cart. A couple argued good-naturedly about which car they'd parked in. The announcer called out a delay for the 6:30 express. The sheer normalcy of it all was suddenly grotesque, a cruel parody of the reality I was now realizing we were in. They were living in the before. Thomas had already catapulted us into the after. Every fiber of my civilized being wanted to dig my heels in, to demand an explanation, to revert to the rational world where things like this didn't happen. But looking into his eyes that held a knowledge of chaos I would never understand, that part of me shriveled and died. There was no time for reason. There was only time for trust. A trust that had to be absolute, blind, and instantaneous. My life, our lives, depended on it. The 5 words hung in the air between us, sucking all the oxygen out of it. We need to leave now. And in that heartbeat, I made the most important decision of my life. I chose to believe him. Time didn't slow down. Fractured. It splintered into 1,000 shards, each one reflecting a different possibility, a different outcome. In one shard, I yank my arm back. I demand an explanation. I stand my ground on the platform, a monument to reason in the face of his inexplicable panic. In that shard, we are still there when the world ends. The protest was a physical pressure behind my teeth. Why? The word was a scream in the silent vault of my mind. Asterisk, this is insane. Our train is literally minutes away. Our bags are here. Our weekend. Our normal life. It's all right here. Asterisk, I could see the sleek, blue engine of our train now, gliding into the far end of the platform with a soft hiss of brakes. People around us stirred, picking up their luggage, readying themselves to board. The promise of home, of safety, of slipping back into the comfortable rhythm of our lives, was physically present, arriving right on schedule. His hand on my arm was the only tether to a reality that was rapidly unraveling. I could feel the fine tremor in his grip, not from fear, but from a terrifyingly controlled surge of adrenaline. His eyes were still locked on mine, and in their depths, I saw no hint of the man I made pancakes for on Sunday mornings. I saw something ancient. I saw a raw, unvarnished plea that was more powerful than any shouted order. Please, that look said. Asterisk, don't fight me. Just this once, don't ask. Just run. Asterisk. It was that silent plea that shattered my resistance. This was Thomas, the man who cried at animal documentaries, the man who still held my hand in the cinema, the man who had built a life with me, brick by careful brick. He wasn't a reckless person. He wasn't prone to drama or panic. His greatest flaw was that he sometimes forgot to take the trash out. For this man to be transformed into this hardened, desperate stranger, the cause had to be real. The threat had to be existential. The decision wasn't a thoughtful process. It was a surrender. It was the conscious, terrifying act of handing the reins of my life over to him completely. I let go of the breath I was holding, a shuddering exhalation that carried with it all my questions, all my logic, all my attachment to the normal world that was, even now, ceasing to exist. I gave one tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It was all he needed. The relief that flashed in his eyes was fleeting, immediately swallowed by the relentless focus of his mission. My agreement was the key turning in the ignition. The trust was given. There was no taking it back. We were now a single unit operating on his instinct. The comfortable future I had envisioned, the window seat, the gentle rocking of the train, the doze vanished, replaced by a terrifying, blank page. And we were running straight into it. I stopped being a partner asking questions and became an extension of his will, my own survival instinct finally fully awakening to the silent alarm he alone could hear. The moment my head nodded, the brief connection between us broke. Thomas's focus instantly shifted from securing my compliance to executing a plan he had formulated in those few, terrifying seconds. This wasn't a blind, panicked flight. This was a tactical retreat, and he was its commander. He didn't drag me toward the main concourse, the obvious exit where a river of people was still flowing, oblivious that his instincts clearly screamed was a trap. It was a choke point, a predictable target. Instead, his grip on my arm tightened and he pivoted, pulling me back along the platform, away from our arriving train, away from the crowd, and into the shadowy, less populated area near the end of the platform. "Thomas, the exit is the other way," I hissed, my voice a strained whisper, my feet stumbling to keep up with his long, determined strides. The logical part of my brain, though subdued, was still screaming in protest. He didn't answer. His head was on a swivel, constantly scanning, assessing, his eyes darting from the faces in the crowd to the pillars, to the high, vaulted ceiling, as if mapping vectors of threat I couldn't possibly perceive. He moved with a purpose that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. He wasn't running. He was moving with a powerful, ground-eating urgency that forced me into a half-jog. We must have looked like two people who had suddenly remembered they'd left the oven on, frantic, but with a specific destination in mind. We passed the bright, open waiting areas and dove into a more industrial zone of the station. The polished tiles gave way to scuffed concrete. The air grew cooler, smelling of ozone and old grease. The sounds changed too. The murmur of the crowd was replaced by the deep thrum of machinery, the hiss of pneumatic brakes from a train idling on a maintenance track. We were moving parallel to the main station but away from its heart. He guided me through a set of heavy, double-fire doors, their push bars groaning in protest. We were in a wide, utilitarian corridor, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that flickered overhead. It was a service corridor, a behind-the-scenes artery for station staff. A janitor's cart was parked against one wall, a mop leaning precariously against it. The distant clang of a wrench on metal echoed from somewhere deep within. This was the hidden underbelly of the beautiful station, and Thomas navigated it with an unsettling certainty. He wasn't guessing. He was following a mental map, choosing left and right turns without hesitation. It was then I understood this wasn't just a random escape. This was knowledge. This was the muscle memory of someone who had been trained to always identify alternative routes, to find the unseen paths, to never be cornered. He was operating on a set of rules written in a language of survival I didn't speak, rules learned in a dust-choked, sun-scorched place a world away from this cold, concrete hallway. He was sacrificing the obvious, easy exit for one that was harder, longer, but ultimately safer. He was putting distance and obstacles between us and the epicenter of the threat he knew was coming. With every step away from the bright, busy platform, the knot of dread in my stomach tightened. We were leaving the world of light and people behind, and with every second, my trust in his instinct was being forged into something harder than steel. We weren't just running away. We were running toward a fragile, desperate chance. Thomas's head snapped around, his eyes locking onto a heavy, unmarked door halfway down the stark corridor. It was metal, painted a dull, grimy green, with a simple push-bar handle. A sign read, "Janitorial, authorized personnel only." Without breaking stride, he shouldered into it. The door swung open with a groan of protest, revealing a sliver of darkness. He pulled me inside and let the door swing shut behind us, plunging us into near-total blackness. The click of the latch engaging was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. For a moment, there was only silence and the profound, suffocating dark. My other senses scrambled to compensate. The air was cold and stale, thick with the cloying, chemical scent of lemon-scented disinfectant, bleach, and the damp, earthy smell of old mops. I could hear the frantic drumbeat of my own heart, the ragged saw of my breath, and the slightly slower, deeper rhythm of his. I could feel the rough, gritty texture of the concrete floor beneath my shoes. Then, a sliver of light. A faint, horizontal bar of jaundiced yellow spilled from the gap under the door, cutting across our feet and illuminating dust motes dancing in the frozen air. It was just enough to outline the shapes around us. We were in a cramped storage closet. Metal shelves lined the walls, crowded with bulging boxes of trash bags, stacks of paper towels, and plastic bottles of cleaning fluids. In the center, a large industrial sink took up space, its cold, dry basin looking like a gaping mouth. A janitor's cart was wedged in a corner, its outline menacing in the low light. Thomas didn't move. He stood perfectly still, his back against the door, his head tilted, listening. He was a statue of tension. He held up a single finger in the dim light, a universal signal for silence. His other hand found mine in the dark, his grip firm, an anchor in the terrifying, sensory-deprived void. The world outside the door was muffled, but it was still there. The distant, echoing call of the station announcer was a ghost of a sound. I could hear the faint, rhythmic thrum of the station's machinery, a sound I'd never noticed before but now seemed as loud as a heartbeat. A door slammed somewhere far away, and we both flinched. Every sound was amplified, every vibration a potential threat. Was that a footstep, a shout, or just the normal, groaning settling of an old building? Time stretched and distorted. Seconds felt like minutes. My mind raced, painting terrifying pictures of what he had seen, what he knew was coming. The darkness pressed in, and the small closet felt like a tomb. We were trapped in this purgatory of waiting, suspended between the normal world we had just fled and the chaos Thomas was certain was about to be unleashed. The only thing real was the pressure of his hand in mine and the terrifying, silent vigilance of the man I thought I knew, who was now a stranger keeping watch in the dark. We were hiding, waiting for a storm we couldn't see, hoping our fragile refuge would be enough. The wait in the dark was a form of torture. Each second was a lifetime, stretched thin over the rack of our own dread. My lungs refused to take a full breath, held in a state of suspended animation. Thomas was a statue beside me, his listening so intense it felt like a physical force, pulling at the silence from the other side of the door. And then it came. It wasn't a single sound. It was a symphony of destruction. First, a deep, percussive thump that was more felt than heard. It vibrated up through the concrete floor, through the soles of my shoes, into the very marrow of my bones. It was the sound of a giant's fist slamming into the earth. The metal shelves around us rattled, the bottles of cleaning solution clinking together like nervous chatter. A fraction of a second of profound, deafening silence followed. The kind of silence that exists in the vacuum after a lightning strike, before the thunder rolls. Then the thunder came. A second explosion, closer, louder, monstrous. This one had a voice, a roaring, tearing shriek of metal being rent apart, of concrete and glass surrendering to an unimaginable force. The door we leaned against shuddered in its frame. The light under the door flickered violently and died, plunging us into absolute blackness. The world outside was screaming. The sound was a living thing. It was a wave of pure noise that hammered into the closet, a pressure that assaulted my eardrums. It was the sound of the station's beautiful, arched ceiling collapsing. It was the sound of 1,000 windows simultaneously atomizing into a blizzard of glittering shrapnel. It was the sound of the train we were meant to be on being twisted into a grotesque sculpture of scrap. And then, the screams began. They were not the excited shouts of travelers or the annoyed yells of an argument. These were sounds I did not know the human voice could make. Primal, raw, and shredded with a terror so absolute it bypassed the brain and came straight from the soul. They were screams of agony, of disbelief, of final, desperate prayers. They were cut short, swallowed by the roar of collapsing structures and the secondary whump of igniting fuel. Dust, thick and choking, began to seep under the door, carried on a shockwave of heat and foul-smelling air. It coated our tongues, filled our nostrils with the scent of pulverized concrete, burnt plastic, and something metallic and coppery that made my stomach lurch. The chaos was a tangible entity. It was in the air that shook. It was in the dust that choked us. It was in the screams that painted pictures of hell in the darkness. The comfortable, predictable symphony of the station had been replaced by the orchestra of the apocalypse, and we were trapped in a tiny, trembling box in the middle of it all. Thomas's hand crushed mine, the only solid point in a universe that was tearing itself apart. The chaos hadn't just erupted, it had consumed the world, and he had known. He had known exactly what that sound would be. In the absolute blackness, the world was reduced to sound and touch. The horrific symphony of destruction outside our flimsy metal door, the groans of dying steel, the pops of electrical short circuits, the relentless, heart-shattering screams, was a reality I could not process. My mind was a blank slate of terror, wiped clean by the sheer, overwhelming sensory overload. I was a raw nerve trembling, each new sound a fresh lash. I felt more than saw Thomas move. His hand, still gripping mine, pulled me down. We sank to the gritty floor, our backs against the cold, shuddering wall, huddled together like children in a storm. The dust was so thick it was a fog, coating our skin, gritting in our teeth. My breath hitched in ragged, panicked sobs that I couldn't control. His voice cut through the din, low and steady, a rock in a raging river. It wasn't the command voice from the platform. This was different. This was hollow, haunted. It was the voice of a man confessing a nightmare. Sarah. My name was a rasp, scratched from a raw throat. Listen to me. I couldn't speak. I could only press closer to him, my face buried against his shoulder, seeking any anchor to reality. Back there, he continued, his words measured, forced out against some immense internal pressure. On the platform, there was a man. He paused, and I could hear him swallow hard. He was just standing, too still. In the middle of all that movement, he was a statue. He took a sharp breath as another explosion, smaller, more distant, rumbled through the floor. I flinched violently, and his arm tightened around me. He had a large backpack, Thomas whispered, his mouth close to my ear. Too large for a day trip. It was new, too new. But his clothes, they were old, worn. It was wrong. His voice gained a grim, professional cadence, as if he were dictating a report. He wasn't looking at the board, wasn't looking for his train, wasn't looking at his phone. His eyes, they were empty, gone. He'd already checked out. He was just waiting for the timer. Another wave of screams echoed, and Thomas's body went rigid, his training overriding his emotion for a second. He was back there. He wasn't in a closet with me. He was back in the dust and heat of a place whose name he never said. In Afghanistan, he said, the word itself sounding like a curse, a key to a locked box. As a medic, you see it. You learn the signs, the 1,000-yard stare of someone who's made peace with their end, the specific way they hold themselves, a mix of resolve and nothingness. It's a look you don't forget. It's the smell of fear before the blood is spilled. I saw that look on him. I knew. His confession hung in the toxic air. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a premonition. It was the brutal, hard-won knowledge purchased with trauma. He had seen the ghost of wars he thought he'd left behind, walking calmly through a train station on a Sunday evening. He had recognized the angel of death in a stranger's eyes. The chaos outside was no longer a random, inexplicable event. It had a face. It had a cause. And the man holding me had read its intention in a language of despair he'd been forced to learn. The truth was more terrifying than any mystery. My husband had looked into the heart of a coming storm and, because of the horrors he'd witnessed, had been the only one to see it. He had saved us with the darkest knowledge imaginable. The echo of his confession hung in the dust-choked air, a truth more solid than the trembling walls around us. The knowledge didn't lessen the horror, but it fundamentally changed our role within it. We were no longer just potential victims who had narrowly escaped. We were witnesses, and he was a man with a skill set that this new, broken world desperately needed. The paralyzing fear that had turned my limbs to lead began to recede, not because the danger was gone, but because it was being replaced by something else. Purpose. I felt Thomas shift beside me. The haunted tone in his voice was gone, replaced by a grim, focused energy. The soldier, the medic, had fully taken command. He released my hand and moved in the darkness. I heard the rustle of a cardboard box, the clatter of plastic. A moment later, the beam of a heavy-duty flashlight pierced the gloom, its stark white light cutting a swath through the swirling dust. He must have seen it on the janitor's cart when we stumbled in. In his hands, it wasn't just a light. It was a tool of triage. Sarah. His voice was calm, directive, the voice he used when explaining a complicated tax form, but layered now with an unshakable authority. I need you to look in those boxes. Find any water, clean rags, towels, anything absorbent. Rip them into strips. Now. The command was a lifeline. It gave my hands a task, my mind a focus. I scrambled to my feet, my earlier trembling replaced by a frantic, determined energy. I tore into the boxes on the shelves, my fingers finding industrial rolls of paper towels, stacks of clean, rough cotton cloths used for buffing floors. I began ripping them, the sound of tearing fabric a sharp counterpoint to the moans from outside. Thomas was already at the sink, trying the taps. A pathetic trickle of brown water, then nothing. The mains were severed. He cursed under his breath, then his light swept the shelves, landing on a large plastic jug. He snatched it, unscrewed the cap, and sniffed. Disinfectant. Diluted. It'll have to do. He looked at me, his face a mask of grim determination in the flashlight's beam. Dust coated his lashes, his hair. He looked like a ghost, but his eyes were fiercely, terribly alive. When we go out there, you stay behind me. You see anyone who is conscious, who is calling out, you point them out. You hand me the strips. You hold the light where I tell you. Do not look at the others. Do you understand? I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I was an extension of him now, a part of his mission. The terrified wife was gone. In her place was a pair of hands, a set of eyes, a holder of light. He took a deep breath, braced himself, and pushed open the metal door. The world we stepped into was not the one we had left. The corridor was now a scene from a nightmare. The harsh emergency lights had kicked in, casting a sickly, intermittent red glow over everything. Dust and smoke swirled thick in the air, reducing visibility to mere feet. The screams were no longer distant. They were everywhere, layered with the crackle of fire and the shouts of other emerging survivors. Thomas moved without hesitation, his beam cutting through the haze. He dropped to his knees beside a woman who was whimpering, a shard of glass embedded in her forearm. His movements were swift, efficient. Sarah, light here. A cloth strip. His voice was calm, a rock in the chaos. I fumbled, then handed him what he needed, holding the beam steady as he cleaned the wound and applied pressure. We became a single, moving unit. He assessed, he treated, he directed. I followed, my world shrinking to the circle of his flashlight beam, to the next strip of cloth, to the next voice crying for help. We passed scenes of unimaginable horror, but Thomas's focus was laser-like. Find the living, stabilize them, move to the next. His past, the nightmare he had carried home, had become our and their only hope. The man who had run from the platform was now running directly into the heart of the inferno, not with a weapon, but with a roll of paper towels and a bottle of diluted disinfectant, fighting a different kind of war, saving lives one terrible wound at a time. Time lost all meaning in the red-hazed hell of the corridor. We moved from one injured person to the next, a small island of frantic, makeshift aid in a sea of chaos. Thomas's calm commands and my trembling but obedient responses became a ritual. Asterisk light here. Hold this. More cloth. Stay with me, sir. Look at me. Asterisk the sounds began to change. The initial, earth-shattering booms were replaced by the wail of 1,000 sirens converging on the station. A symphony of help arriving too late for so many, but finally, blessedly, here. The first responders found us. A team of firefighters in bulky gear, their masks making them look like alien creatures, emerged from the smoke. Their powerful lights swept over us, illuminating the scene we had been working in. They saw Thomas, his shirt stained with dust and blood that wasn't his own, expertly tying a tourniquet on a man's leg. They saw me, a ghostly figure holding a flashlight with a white-knuckled grip, handing him strips of torn cloth. For a moment, there was a silent understanding. One of the firefighters clapped a heavy hand on Thomas's shoulder. "We've got it from here, Doc. Get yourselves out. Now." The command broke the spell. The adrenaline that had been holding me upright suddenly vanished, and my legs buckled. Thomas caught me, his own strength seeming to drain away in the same instant. He simply nodded at the firefighter, his voice gone. Supporting each other, we stumbled toward the way we had come, guided now by the flashing lights of emergency vehicles visible through shattered doorways. We emerged into the cool night air. The contrast was jarring. The world outside was orderly, bright, and terrifyingly normal. Police tape was being strung up. Ambulances lined the street, their lights painting the surrounding buildings in pulses of red and white. People wrapped in shock blankets stood in dazed silence, their eyes wide and unseeing. A paramedic rushed toward us, guiding us to the back of an ambulance. She wrapped a coarse, silver blanket around my shoulders and handed Thomas a bottle of water. He drank mechanically, his eyes fixed on the gaping, wounded maw of the station entrance, now vomiting smoke and emergency personnel. We sat there on the bumper of the ambulance for a long time. We didn't speak. There were no words. The silence between us was no longer filled with dread, but with a profound, staggering exhaustion and a shared, unutterable knowledge. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man covered in grime and the sweat of other people's pain. The man who had seen the monster in the crowd. The man whose darkest memories had become our salvation. The gentle accountant was still there, but now he was fused, forever, with the battle-hardened medic. I saw the full weight of the past he had carried alone, and I understood the cost of the instinct that had saved us. He finally turned to me, his eyes finding mine. The intensity was gone, replaced by a deep, bottomless grief and a flicker of something else. Vulnerability. He had shown me the monster he fought, and now he was waiting to see if I was afraid of it. I reached out, my hand trembling, and placed it over his. It wasn't a gesture of passion, but of connection, of acceptance, of a bond that had been forged in the most terrible of fires. We had lost our luggage. We had lost our sense of safety. We had lost the innocent belief that the world was a predictable place. But we had gained something else. A new beginning. Not one that erased the past, but one that integrated it. We knew, with terrifying clarity, how fragile it all was. And that knowledge, as painful as it was, became a gift. A promise to never again take a single mundane, ordinary second for granted. To love more fiercely, to live more fully, anchored not in the illusion of safety, but in the unshakable truth of the man beside me, and the trust that had saved us both. We were alive, and that was everything.